So welcome everybody. My name is Paul. I'm a professional real estate agent in southwestern Virginia near Lexington, Rockbridge County. And today I'm going to talk about how professional realtors evaluate property. This is a very abstruse subject to some people because people think they bought a house at a certain price and automatically there's X percent increase in value and therefore it should be worth X dollars when they sell it. And the same way with buyers. Buyers always nitpick and they'll find everything they can to reduce the property price for them. So pricing a piece of real estate is a very, very difficult process many times because especially in the countryside there's no comparables. In some communities where there's a cul-de-sac, there's a group of a development or something, a lot of the homes are very similar. Some of them have almost identical layouts, but they're a little bit different position and so on. In that area, in that market, you can get a pretty good idea of a price based on recent sales and so on, and there might be quite a few recent sales. Out in the countryside, every property is completely unique. And then, because they're spread out, there may not be very many comparables nearby in the time frame that you want to check, for example, the past year or the past few months. So therefore, evaluating a property is very, very much like an art in a way, and it has to be done with some business acumen to figure out who's the likely buyer, what their means are pretty much, and what they can afford, and whether they'll buy at a certain price or not. And then you have to kind of set a price and hope for the best, basically. A realtor we try to hope for maybe at least 95% of the asking. Typically, honestly, most brokers will put a little bit of an edge on the price, but you don't want to put too much because if you price it too high, it'll just sit there, and you don't want that for your client. So it's almost better to price it just a little bit under, unless it's a really tight market and everybody's bidding. But if you have basically an average market and you might get 5 or 6 bidders, you might get 5 or 6 views in a month, then you want to just say, okay, well, I'll take the guy that comes along first with the money and we'll compromise a little bit on the price, but not too much. So I'm going to go through a little bit of here. I have a list that I put out for my customers when they're considering buying a house. I give them a little bit of information about what I think, how we evaluate property. And I put a note at the top of this. It says, estimating the potential sale value of a home or property involves some uncertainty. As market conditions change frequently, an estimate is given considering current conditions and comparing recent sales on similar properties on the market now. Now here's what we evaluate, okay, the average assessed value. When you go onto the tax records, you find out that a property, let's say we'll use some round numbers here, let's say it was assessed at $200,000. Typically, an assessed price they don't want to over-assess because the taxpayers don't like it. So they try to assess it. Typically, it's a little under or often quite a bit under the actual market price because if the market has changed since the last assessment and all of a sudden there's a bidding war, a property that's assessed at $200,000 might actually go for $250,000 or something like that. You see, so the assessed value is not a really great comparable for what a sale price is. In some cases, a rare case, the market has gone really down or a property is depreciated and the assessed value is actually higher than the actual sale value in case the property is decayed and so on. So any structures or improvements on the land, anything at all. If you see a house, sometimes you see in a modern suburb, there's just a house. That's it. Just sits there and it's raw and it's basic. Okay, if you want to put a garden in, go to it, but they don't give you one. So out in the countryside, you'll find people with all different kinds of added improvements. There might be a shed, might be a garden, might be a pool, might be an above ground pool, who knows, a doghouse, and so on. So there's a lot of improvements and they can make a big difference in the price. It could cost some serious money to put in a driveway, for example. If you notice the driveway has been recently repaved and everything, and it's like a few 100 feet long, well, that costs some buckaroos. So pricing, you want to get the maximum for your client. Basically, we are obligated as realtors to have the seller's interest at best heart and try to price it in a way to get the maximum return for them. So we have to evaluate, and we have to know if someone says, okay, well, I put this thing on the property and I guess it cost $10,000. Let's say it was a fancy desk or something. If you can show some documentation, say, 10 years ago I put this pool in here and it cost me $25,000, then you can kind of like say, okay, well, I got some proof that this property is different than my neighbor's because it's got a serious investment here, the driveway, fence, or whatever. So a garage, any kind of extra structures. If it, for example, has an apartment on it, if it has a rentable space, that's another feature. It's another story, actually, maybe. But sometimes you can get a situation where you can buy a home and you might have a $500 or $600 rent coming in from some apartment that happens to be on the property, you see. So that can be a real bonus. The general type of land and location. Naturally, land matters. If it's really steep and wooded and hard to build on there and rough to clear, it's just going to have a lesser value. If you got nice open land and what they call bottom land for farm, beautiful soil, nice stream going by, nice sun, all that, good timber, now you're talking about some extra value on the property that will definitely boost it in the sale price. The general market conditions, that makes a big difference. The trend is people are moving out the country. There's a shortage of homes out here that are already built, and it can be a little bit of a bidding war if you want to get a home in some of these communities, because there's not much for sale in some areas. There's extra values added for things like percolation tests done, if you've got a survey on the property, if you've done some extra fencing, or if you got some timber, you got good privacy, you got a really great sun exposure for a crop or for solar power and so on. All those little things can add some extra value, perceived value, to the buyer. So a really smart realtor is going to be thinking about all these things and say, look, what kind of buyer is going to come here? Because let's say, for example, it's a solar thing. You got a beautiful land for some solar, or maybe you even have a solar installation already. Well, there's a certain kind of buyer who's very, very interested in having solar. And for that particular type of buyer, they're going to be very interested and maybe bid a little higher. Now, someone who doesn't have solar already on their property, or really couldn't care less about it, and you have a solar on your property, then they may not really care about it, and they may not really, in fact, they might think it's a nuisance and not even want it there in their yard. So there's all these little subtle nuances when you try to price a property. If you can find things that are accessible, that are comparable, it's very difficult sometimes to find a property it's almost impossible in the country to find a comparable in some areas, because there's just really nothing like it. Nothing is sold. The acreage is different, the house is different, the facilities, the ambiance, everything's different. And you have to actually add some value for a septic tank. That costs some money. A driveway costs some money. Good fencing. If you see a whole bunch of fencing around a bunch of acres of land, well, that costs some money to put in. So all those things, your broker, if you're selling a piece of property and your agent comes, just tell them about all the things that add value to your particular property so they can make a good price and get it up there at your best benefit. So just checking my list here a bit more here. If your price is too high, then it'll just sit there. If you go for it and you say, hey, just tell me what it's worth and I'm going to add 20,000, I'm going to add 15,000 or whatever, that's not going to work very well, because it just may be that, let's say, for example, someone is searching in a home for up to $250,000, and you decide that you're just going to go for $265 because you think, that's what it's worth. Well, you're going to miss out on a lot of those buyers who are looking for up to $250. If you put it at $252, $253, or something like that, then you might catch them. But if you go too high above a price range, that you might miss some opportunity as far as getting a good buyer. So again, when a realtor comes to visit you and assess the property, tell them everything you need to know. Tell him or her all the different features, the money that you put in, a little bit of the history of the property, how long you've owned it, anything, just any kind of pictures you might have from the past. They might be even helpful. You might have some beautiful pictures from a few years ago with the Christmas lights or something, and then you tell a realtor, hey, we're selling in the fall here, and we just happen to have some Christmas pictures of our house a few years ago, so throw those in there. So I made another video about photographing your property for sale, and I hope you go and listen to that. So thanks again for listening. I try to make these videos short and informative. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'm very available, and I do a lot of guiding or scouting work. I go out and look around. I've driven all over the place, and some very interesting roads I've been on. So thanks again, and please like and share if you find this useful information, and appreciate your feedback. Thanks.